Yeah, I'm going to be trying to, at least until I go through the entire Rose Bates portfolio, I'll be featuring a new photo. This one's quite blurry, but nonetheless, it's unique and is never before seen photo of Alice Bailey. So I'll be doing that until I go through the entire portfolio, and then we'll just circulate back through them. So welcome to the 7th webinar on a treatise on cosmic fire. This webinar series is available on makara.us, a fabulous resource, under the subheading Mori Federation Webinars, then Webinar Series in Progress. All episodes of this, the Secret Teaching series, Secret Teachings of All Ages series, and the Secret Doctrine series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald in the webinar you wish to view. You can register for any of these webinars on the homepage of moriafederation.com. Okay, we spent much of our last session exploring chart 2, entitled Logos of a Solar System, which appears on page 94 of TCF. Unique to this chart is the illustration of the 3 life waves, but there's a lot of other cool stuff, including the Sanskrit terms for the states of consciousness related to the subplanes, as well as the element and sensory correspondences, location of the involutional elemental kingdoms that are passing down through the subplanes in order to eventually incarnate in the mineral kingdom, a list of the vehicles or bodies of each plane, a column listing the qualities or determining energies of the consciousness of a human being, and finally a column describing certain reflective aspects of the lower 5 planes indicated by the 3 brackets. Then we began a section called the Prana of Forms, the last subsection of the chapter, the Nature of Prana. So I'd like to start by rereading this passage. Could we get a reader, please, for this?
Yeah, Andrea, would you like to read?
Sure. The prana of forms. It must first be pointed out that forms are necessarily of 2 kinds, having a different place in the scheme. Forms that are the result of the work of the 3rd and the 2nd logos and their united life. Such forms are the units in the vegetable, animal, and mineral kingdoms. Forms that are the result of the united action of the 3 logos, logi, and comprise the strictly deva and human forms. There is also the stiller form.
Whoops, you faded out, Andrea.
That this matter is, sorry,
Start again at,
sorry about that.
could you start again
This
at,
is also the, yes, I'm sorry, I think I'm jumping in and out. There is a still simpler form embodied in the substance of which all the other forms are made. This matter is, strictly speaking, the atomic and molecular matter, and is animated by the life or energy of the 3rd logos.
Great, yeah, you came through on that, so thank you. Okay, so the logi mentioned here are the 3 aspects of the solar logos, illustrated here on page 2, or on chart 2, right? And here on a chart that appears in the last pages of a treatise on cosmic fire. So they're, you know, this 1st, 2nd, and 3rd logi are aspects of the solar logos in terms of how those terms are used in the text right now. The reason that only the second and third logi are involved in the creation of the vegetable and animal kingdom is revealed by a study of the second life wave shown here, highlighted here. Note that the evolutionary part of the wave only ascends into the lower mental, indicating that animals are capable of some mental activity. It's incipient, DK calls it, incipient mental activity. Forms that are the result of the united action of three logi and comprise the strictly David human kingdoms are able to take advantage of all three life waves, especially the third, which makes possible discipleship and initiation. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have atomic and molecular matter, which is animated by the energy of the third logos, and thus includes only the involutionary plunge into substance. But a key aspect of this group is that it provides substance of which all other forms are made. If this is the sixth and seventh hierarchies, they call the breadbasket because the basic substance is drawn from them. Any thoughts or questions about this part of it? You can ask questions anytime during the webinar. Just put your hand up, or you can also put a question in the chat box, and Mikhail will bring it forward. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please?
And Veronica.
Hello.
Hi, could you read, please?
Yes. Dealing with the first group of forms, it must be noted that the pranic emanation of by units of the animal and vegetable kingdom, after they have absorbed both solar and planetary prana, are naturally a combination of the two and are transmitted by means of surface radiation, as in solar and planetary prana, to certain lesser groups of devas of a not very high order who have a curious and intricate relationship to the group soul of the radiating animal or vegetable. This matter cannot be dealt with here. These devas are of a violet hue, but of such a pale color as to be almost grey. They are in a transitional state and merge with a puzzling confusion with of entities that are almost on the involutionary arc.
Who else but DK can write a paragraph like this? Okay, first up, in dealing with the first group of forms, it must be noted that the pranic emanations given off by units of the animal and vegetable kingdom after they have absorbed both solar and planetary prana are naturally a combination of the two, meaning the two pranas. So the first group of forms are the three lower kingdoms as shown here, though here DK addresses only the animal and vegetable kingdoms, which, like the human kingdoms, absorb both solar and planetary prana and emanate a combination of these two pranas, colored by their own vibration. Next, and are transmitted by means of surface radiation, as in solar and planetary prana, to certain lesser groups of devas of a not very high order who have a curious and intricate relationship to the group soul of the radiating animal or vegetable. There's so much information here. So first, we discovered that the animal and vegetable kingdoms also have a surface radiation, just like the four primary groups that we looked at in a previous webinar. In fact, we might assume that all the categories in these charts, entity manifesting, body of manifestation, etc., would have a combined vegetable and animal equivalent. We could put another chart here for vegetable and animal. Next, we discover that devas not only emanate prana, as in the case of the violet and golden devas connected with human beings, but that these, quote, lesser groups of devas of a not very high order also receive prana. And finally, we learned that devas can have a relationship with the soul aspect. In this case, the group soul of the radiating animal or vegetable kingdom. So, this is so provocative, evocative, right? This idea of the group soul of the radiating animal or vegetable kingdom. So, just how do these group souls organize themselves around these two kingdoms? Do you have a species that has its own soul? Or is it, certainly there isn't one group soul for all animals, from an ant to a giraffe, or, there must be subgroup souls, but he doesn't talk about this here anyway. But let's find out more about the group soul of the three lower kingdoms in nature. And this is a fascinating read from the last pages of TCF. So could we get a reader for this, please?
Yes. Janet, would you like to read?
Sure. It is useful to remember that in three lower kingdoms, manifestation or appearance on the physical plane is ever group manifestation, and not the appearance of separated units. Each group soul, as it is called, is divided into 7 parts, which appear in each of the 7 races of a world period. And there is an interesting distinction between them and the units of the human kingdom. When proportions of the group soul in one of its 7 parts are out of incarnation, they are to be found on the astral plane, even though the mother group soul is found on the mental plane. Human units of the 4th kingdom, when out of incarnation, pass through the astral to the mental and descend again to the incarnation from the mental levels. Each group soul, therefore, subjectively forms a triangle of force with one point, the highest, to be found in the mental plane, and the lowest on the etheric levels of the physical plane, and another on the astral plane. The 3rd point for the mineral group soul is found on the 2nd subplane of the astral, the vegetable on the 3rd, and the animal on the 4th. It is owing to the fact that a center of force for the animal group soul is found on the 4th subplane of the astral plane that it is possible for transference eventually to be made out of that kingdom into the 4th.
So we could spend 30 minutes talking about this passage. It's got some amazing stuff.
For sure.
What's that? Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Since DK didn't specify which mental and etheric subplane the group soul of the 3 lower kingdom occupies, I just generically place them on the 4th. I may be wrong, but I'm assuming that when DK places the 3rd astral point for the mineral kingdom on the 2nd subplane, he's counting from the bottom up. Same with the 3rd subplane for the vegetable and the 4th for the animal. Though this isn't DK's usual way of counting, it seems to be corroborated by this last statement. The fact that a center of force for the animal group soul is found on the 4th subplane of the astral, that fact makes it possible for transference eventually to be made out of that kingdom into the 4th, meaning from an animal into a human kingdom. I mean, this in and of itself is an extraordinary piece of info, indicating the all importance of the numerical associations. So it's the fact that the animal kingdom soul is situated on this fourth subplane of the emotional plane that allows for that kingdom, it allows for the human kingdom to draw animal man across the line from the animal kingdom. It's really an extraordinary little piece of info. And, I'm tempted to look at some other, like the fact that there's 7 parts of these connected with these animal and vegetables, and that each part correlates to the 7 races of humanity. So during, for instance, our 5th brute race, we have the 5th group of animals and vegetables that appear with us. And then when we move into the next root race, a whole other group of animals and vegetables will appear. That was kind of an extraordinary teaching. Okay, and this seems as good a place as any to bring forward some additional information on the vegetable kingdom as regards prana. Could we get a reader just for this top part, please?
Yeah. Joe, would you like to read?
All right. The vegetable kingdom has a peculiar place in the economy of the system as the transmitter of the vital pranic fluid. The vegetable kingdom is definitely a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. Here I am using these words in their broadest and most general sense.
Okay, so you can see by this chart that we're really talking about the vegetable kingdom acting as the spleen for that which is incarnation in the entire system, because the head or brain of this system is the solar logos, the grand heavenly man, right? The heart and throat is the heavenly man. So we're looking at the entire solar system here, and the etheric body of the solar system is right here, the vegetable, the spleen, I should say, rather than the etheric body. The spleen of the solar system is the activity that the spleen provides in a human being, for instance, is provided to the solar system via the vegetable kingdom. It's kind of extraordinary. Okay. Back to the text. These devas are also of a violet hue, but of such a pale color as to be almost gray. They are in a transitional state and merge with a puzzling confusion with groups of entities that are almost on the evolutionary arc. Well, you feel like you could read a whole chapter about this. It just hints at some of the possibilities. Violet would seem to be the color of those devas that are either distributors or recipients of planetary prana, ranging from the electric pale violet of the devas of the first physical etheric subplane down to this group, the gray violet, much lesser devas. It's also worth noting that like the vegetable kingdom as a whole, this group of devas is in a transitional state. So we could spend time on this chart, but we'll just, at this point, use it as an introduction and plug in this quality of the etheric on the macrocosmic level. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please?
Judy, would you like to read?
Sure. In dealing with the second group, the human form transmits the emanative radiation to a much higher grade of deva. These deva are of more pronounced hue, and after due assimilation of the human radiation, they transmit it principally to the animal kingdom, thus demonstrating the close relationship between the two kingdoms. If the above explanation of the intricate interrelation between the sun and the planets, between the planets and the evolving forms upon them, between the forms themselves in ever descending importance, demonstrates nothing more than the exquisite interdependence of all existence, then much will have been achieved.
Thank you, Judy. So first up, in dealing with the second group, the human form transmits the emanative radiation to a much higher grade of deva. That is compared to the violet gray devas that the animals and vegetable kingdom, that their emanation goes to, right? That's what he's comparing it to. So the second group we just learned are, quote, forms that are the result of the united action of three logi and comprise the strictly deva and human forms. So it's this group's emanation that we're talking about. So we have a lesser grade of devas receiving the prominent emanations of the animal and plant kingdoms, and a, quote, much higher grade of devas that receive pranic emanations from the human kingdom. And those seem to be just the animal kingdom, not the vegetable. So it seems to me that there's a vibratory resonance between the kingdoms that emanate prana and those deva lives that receive it, which makes it all the more extraordinary that human beings are able to receive solar prana as well as planetary prana. Also note that just like stars, planets, and human beings, devas are able to both receive and emanate prana. Next, these devas are of a more pronounced hue, and after due assimilation of the human radiation, they transmit it principally to the animal kingdom, thus demonstrating the close relationship between the two kingdoms. So we see a pattern emerging. The sun emanates prana, which is focused by a group of golden-hued devas who transmit this solar prana to humanity. We might ask if this or another group of devas is also needed to transmit prana to the earth itself, or is it able to directly receive solar prana? I suspect that there is a group of devas that transmits prana to the planet itself. He just doesn't mention it. The earth then emanates prana, which is transmitted to humanity by a group of violet-hued devas who are also instrumental in providing the substance for humanity's etheric vehicles. The prana emanated by humanity is received by a group of devas whose pranic emanations are received mostly by the animal kingdom. And finally, at least so far, the emanative prana of the animal and plant kingdoms is received by a lesser group of gray-violet devas. Now, my guess is that this is a very rudimentary outline of a system that is much, much more intricate and far-reaching. DK summarizes by saying, if the above explanation of the intricate interrelation between the sun and the planets, between the planets and the evolving forms upon them, between the forms themselves and ever descending importance, demonstrates nothing more than the exquisite interdependence of all existences, then much will have been achieved. So it's pretty clear that devas form the connective tissue between all levels, and that there is no broken link that, you know, between us and our galaxy, there is a Davic hierarchy that links us all the way up and out, and is just in accordance with our consciousness, the, you know, the parameters of our consciousness that indicate what we're able to have an experience of. But in fact, everything is linked. You know, the idea that all is one in a way is, during incarnation, that fact is achieved by this connective tissue of the Davic realm. Any thoughts or questions about anything so far?
And Veronica asks, what about the mineral?
Yeah, isn't it curious that he has left it out? I would think there's no way that, in fact, it is left out. They are a kingdom wherein the involutionary elemental lives eventually incarnate into, and those elemental lives are, you could say, the lowest aspect of the Davic evolution. So it's interesting because they form this crossing point, right? You have this involutional elemental lives. It's indicated on that chart that we spent so much time on last time, right? And then they finally incarnate in the mineral kingdom, and then begin that eons long journey up through the kingdoms, right? So it's like a transitional kingdom. But you wonder, what about the prana of the mineral kingdom? And in terms of both that which is received and that which is emanated, and what is, you know, what group of devas receives mineral prana? He just leaves it out. And so, you know, we can only speculate. Good question, though. I wondered the same thing. Okay. Hang on a sec. I'm going to catch up. All right. Could we get a reader, please?
Karen, would you like to read?
Sure. I have a question though. You know, you said that animals are capable of some mental activity and they can be drawn of the animal kingdom into the human kingdom. But it was the solar angels who planted the spark of mind, higher mind, yes,
Well, yes.
in the human kingdom that allowed us to evolve from the animal kingdom into the human kingdom.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right, Karen. So, you know, I mean, we've all seen the photo of the elephant drawing a picture of an elephant on an easel. Have you guys seen that? It's extraordinary. You don't do that without mind. And, you know, and there's been, and you know, there's a YouTube of a dog that has learned 350 nouns. You know, there's 350 objects in a room next to where the owner and this dog are sitting, and then she gives this command, and he goes and grabs one of 350 objects. That's a vocabulary. You know, that's extraordinary. So clearly, you know, and of course, dolphins and porpoises and all the research that's been done there that suggests mind. You know, and my guess is that even the lesser animals, that there is some level of mind involved, but something altogether other happens when that great initiation, which is individualization,
Right.
when you're brought across the line, then a contract, which is called acquiescence, a soul acquiesces to link with a human being, and that at that point, the third life wave, do you remember the chart?
Right,
And
right,
third life wave becomes a potential.
right.
It's not actually brought in yet, but it then becomes a potential in the life of the, jiva. So yeah,
So the door too was closed for the animal kingdom to evolve into the human kingdom at some point, right? And I don't know in the literature where it says when that door might be opened again.
I think he says in the next round, which is, that's many globes, and with each globe with its 7 root races. So, you're looking at, gosh, you know, millions and millions, I would say hundreds of millions of years. It kind of gets out of sequential time when you start moving from globe to globe. You also have those periods of rest between globes, but it's a very, very long time. And when you look at the state of our humanity, you can see why. The
Yeah,
last thing we need right now is more beginning human beings incarnating. We need to get this group going, to the next level before we bring any more in.
well, we know that if we have pets that that many of them are studying to be humans, I'm sure. And I speculate that at some point maybe I will be the solar angel for some of my animals.
Yeah, well, the path to Sirius, which is the 4th path out of this solar system of 7, is you go there to train to be a solar angel.
Right.
And for who? Well, I know Michael speculates that it might be for the Mars humanity, in the same way that Venus worked for our humanity. But DK doesn't tell us that. He does tell us that we go to train to be a solar angel, but he doesn't tell us what humanity. But it could be here. It could be that once Spot and Fluffy are brought across the line, that we will work with them. I have no. I mean, it sounds very sentimental, but
I know.
I have a very strong feeling that I'm creating an unbreakable bond with my pet, who's in the last year of his life, and and I get the sense that we'll connect again in the future, and maybe that's part of that destiny. It's just speculation. There's so many possibilities,
Well, we have a responsibility, we know, to each of the kingdoms below us. Just at, each kingdom has a responsibility to the kingdom beneath to lift it up. And so,
yeah, especially the human kingdom really is that great shepherding force for all the lesser kingdoms, because everything will become a human being, and everything beyond us has been some form of a human being. It's that I always think of that like the neck in the, and what are they called? Those timers that you turn over that have the salt that runs through it,
oh, the hourglass, yeah, you mean?
Yeah, the hourglass. Duh. Yeah, the hourglass, that little narrow part of the neck, that's like the human being. Everything has to go through there,
Right, right. So, yeah, so and the hierarchy is lifting us up too. So, that's kind of how it works as we humanity, are about to take hopefully this first initiation.
That's right. In fact, more specifically, every one of the 7 hierarchies of which our solar system is composed lifts the one beneath it, right? It's a positive negative polarity, and you're drawn naturally into the hierarchy above you. So the lesser lives, the lesser builders who are just the molecular and atomic life, is drawn into the next kingdom, which is the amalgamation of those into the forms, and then that hierarchy is drawn into the personality, hierarchy of personality, etc., all the way up. It's just the nature of the law of attraction that connects us, all the hierarchies that way.
Yes, okay, I will read now.
Thank
And
you.
Another fact which must also be brought out is the close relationship between all these evolutions of nature, from the celestial sun down to the humblest violet via the Deva evolution, which acts as a transmuting force throughout the system. Lastly, all work with fire. Fire is internal, inherent, and latent. Fire radiatory and emanative. Fire generated, assimilated, and radiated. Fire vivifying, stimulating, and destroying. Fire transmitted, reflected, and absorbed. Fire, the basis of all life. Fire, the essence of all existence. Fire, the means of development and the impulse behind all evolutionary process. Fire, the builder, the preserver, and the constructor. Fire, the originator, the process and the goal. Fire, the purifier and the consumer.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, first we have DK's statement about the close relation between all evolutions in nature, a closeness brought about by and through the Deva kingdom, which provides the transmuting energy and interactions between these apparently separate evolutions. Next, we have this amazing passage. Lastly, all work with fire. Of course, fire is the subject that DK chose to frame this entire treatise, that is, a treatise on cosmic fire, because all fire in our system originates in that cosmic fire found on the cosmic mental levels. The first of these, fire inherent and latent, is fire by friction, the fire of matter, which works in tandem with fire radiatory and emanative. Could we get a reader for this short passage?
Yeah. Kristen, would you like to read?
So, latent or interior fire produces the internal heat, which makes the solar system productive of all forms of life. It is the inherent warmth that causes all fertilization, whether human, animal, or vegetable. Active or radiatory fire retains in life and causes the evolution of all that has evolved into objectivity by means of latent fire.
Thank you. So next, fire generated, assimilated, and radiated describes a transfer of fire, right? Generated, assimilated, and radiated. More specifically, the generation, assimilation, and radiation of prana, both on cosmic and systemic levels. And as we just read, causes the evolution of all that has evolved into objectivity by means of latent fire. So this is a 1-2 punch, right? It's through latent fire that the objective forms come into being, but then it's through radiant fire that the evolution of those initial forms becomes possible. This is a really important statement, suggesting that radiatory fire is the actual means by which evolution takes place. Next, fire vivifying, stimulating, and destroying suggests fire's inherent relation to the cycle of life, to birth, life, and death, right? vivifying, stimulating, and destroying birth, life, and death. This fire brings the form of some unit of consciousness into outer livingness, stimulates its growth, and finally, when the time is right, destroys that form. Next, fire transmitted, reflected, and absorbed. We just learned in the previous paragraph that it is, quote, the Deva evolution which acts as the transmuting force throughout the system. The phrase fire transmitted, reflected, and absorbed reminds us that the pranic energy transmitted by the Deva kingdom is a form of fire. DK usually uses the word absorption to indicate the internalization of some influence, some progressive influence, which allows a unit of consciousness to engage with some new form of energy. You absorb and then are able to engage with a new form of energy. For example, later in TCF, DK tells us the causal body is produced by means of the positive life or fire of the spirit, electric fire, meeting the negative fire of matter or fire by friction. This causes the blazing forth of solar fire. This central blaze inevitably, in due process, burns up the third fire, or, quote unquote, absorbs its essence. This is the point of absorption. So that absorbing allows for the movement, eventually the destruction of the causal body. Next, fire, the basis of all life. Fire, the essence of all existence. Said another way, fire and flame destroy the body of an arhat. Their essence makes him immortal. Letters on Occult Meditation expands on this theme. Could we get a reader, please?
Yeah, Marianne, would you like to read?
Yes, okay. Fire forms the basis of all. The self is fire. The intellect is the face of fire. And lettered in the microcosmic physical vehicles lies hid a veritable fire that can either be a destructive force, burning the tissue of the body and the stimulating centers of an undesirable character, or be a vivifying factor acting as a stimulating and awakening agent.
Any questions? Okay, next, fire, the means of development and the impulse behind all evolutionary process. So the fire of mind and the Kundalini fire are the primary agents of development and evolution for human being. Could we get a reader for this passage, please?
Miri, you want to read?
Yes. As time progresses, the fire of mind burns more brightly and thus reach a point where it begins to burn through the etheric web. That portion of the web that can be found guarding the center at the very top of the head and admitting entrance to the downflow from the spirit. By its means, certain things are brought about. The Kundalini fire is consciously directed and controlled by the mind, or will aspect from the mental plane. The two fires of matter, by the power of the mind of man, are blended first with each other, and secondly with the fire of mind. The united result of this blending is the destruction, under rule and order, of the etheric web, and the consequent production of continuity of consciousness and the admission into the personal life of man of life more abundant, or the third fire of spirit. the downrush of spirit, and uprising of the inner fires of matter, controlled and directed by the conscious action of the fire of mind, produce corresponding results on the same levels on the astral and mental planes, so that a paralleling contact is brought about and the great work of liberation proceeds in an ordered manner.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions?
Janet has a question. Can reflective fire also be part of radiatory fire?
Yes. It's a short answer. You have to think about what the difference would be, because if you're reflecting fire, it's suggesting that you are the go-between agent between two states, right? Whereas the radiating fire suggests that that fire is coming from you, strictly from you. But I think they're quite related, in fact. Anyone else? Okay. Next, fire, the builder and preserver and the constructor. So the fire devas are what DK calls the greater builders. They guide the fire elementals called the lesser builders. These two groups form the positive and negative polarities of an electrical phenomena which is responsible for the manifestation and preservation of our solar system, right? This is all at physical levels, physical and physical etheric levels, right? Next, fire, the originator, the process, and the goal are the three phases of all manifested life, which demonstrate psychically as one great process of becoming, leading to the final goal of union with the spirit aspect. And finally, fire, the purifier and the consumer. This is the destroyer aspect of fire. Purification destroys impediments to expansion until finally the form itself is consumed so that a more fit vehicle can take its place. So, thoughts or questions on anything in this passage? Nowhere else in DK's teachings is there a comparable synthetic statement on the nature of fire.
Vivian asks, could you help me to understand the distinction between light and fire?
Light is a form of fire. It's the emanative aspect of fire, and of course, where is that light being perceived? We tend to think of, for instance, in a Glamour World Problem in the beginning pages, DK says the soul is light, and light is the soul, right? So that fundamental quality of light is connected to the solar angel, which is a form, a high Davic form, and that light that we experience would be in the nature of that radiating fire that it is emanating. And we have to understand that light, as we understand it on this plane, is not the same light. It becomes a metaphor or a lower expression of that light. That light is what stimulates awareness or understanding. And that comes in part through this phohatic quality of that plane, which is monastic fire, the fire of mind. So the fire of mind and the light of the soul are very much connected in that way. And it's illuminative, right? The higher subplanes of the mental plane are are those subplanes of illumination. So its quality, you know, on the physical plane, you turn on a light, you can see stuff, right? You go in a room, turn on a light, you see the room. That becomes a metaphor for a much deeper experience, which is the illumination of awareness at that higher level. And if that is monastic fire. I saw Robert's hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the more DK says about fire, the more it remains a mystery, because what that word means, these are all things that this thing fire does. There's nothing about what it is, because it's inexpressible, you know? And so in a strange way, this whole book is about a mystery that cannot be described. And yet there's 1,300 pages of it, which I find amazing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on, Robert. Ultimately, it can't be described. It can be talked about, but it can't be, you can never come into any true understanding of it directly, you know, like its final essence. You know, he makes a distinction between fire and flame, you know, that fire is a manifestation of flame, and flame, he gets a different, oops, get back here. He gives a different connotation to, right? It suggests, at least in the manifested realm of our universe, pure spirit. Whereas fire, like as in the sea of fire on the first subplane of the cosmic physical plane, it's still on the cosmic physical, and that's why it's a sea of fire and not a sea of flame, because it's still at that very highest possible level of substance. It is the fire of substance, right? And out of that, all the Fohat, which are all those levels of electrical manifestation, are drawn from that sea of fire, you know, and that's just on the cosmic physical. And we, you know, the masters of wisdom are still working to open their awareness to that highest subplane. So, you know, how can we be expected to have any direct knowingness of that place, you know?
Yeah, just like when we use the word spirit, this is a reminder to me of how unknowable all these core words are, no matter how they're defined. But we can look at their operations from the outside to a certain extent, and just it's a very humbling thing. And you know, just to go back to the Davis for a second, that interesting question about the implantation of the spark of mind in humanity, clearly there's an implication there that the devas are involved in that process. That, you know, whether they're devas of our planetary chain or whether they're devas from the Venus, whatever they are, but you know, you use the phrase connective tissue, and it's kind of, because the question comes up, well, why are the devas needed? Why is there not just a direct transmission from, you know, one of the kingdoms to the other? And the idea of connective tissue in the body, it has so many different forms. And so I guess I'm in this place at this moment of kind of like my mind is spinning about the unknowable, unknowability of it all. But anyway, thank you. It's interesting.
Yeah, you know, we have to get used to that. That's sort of the condition that we begin with, and exists the entire time you're reading DK. That's just, you have to get used to that condition that ultimately you can't know, right? Because it's a question of consciousness, not of a, horizontal gathering of information. It's not about that. It's, even though we're doing that also, but there's, we're pretty restricted when we consider things from the point of view of the lower mind, which is what we're doing here. Hopefully in this conversation, we're also stimulating the intuition so that we're drawing something beyond just what I'd call horizontal understanding or horizontal knowledge.
It's that great thing that St. Paul says about seeing through a glass darkly. Someday we will know. Someday we will see as now we are known. So in DK's writings, in a way, are kind of magnetizing us to move in that direction, to want to understand that which we are still unable to
directly grok. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It also reminds me of the Hindu story about, the three blind men who are talking to each other about the elephant.
Mhm.
And one feels the tail, one feels the trunk, one feels the tusks, and they describe what they're feeling, and they say, no, it's not like that at all. It's like this,
Right.
and that's all we can do is just according to its attributes. But the essential knowing is a function of consciousness. And in this case, in the case of fire, a very high level, a very, very high level to know it in it with any kind of directness. But, I think that's why he makes a point of giving this list. There's
Yeah.
something like 26 attributes here, I think, somewhere I counted them, that allow us to, like the blind man and the elephant, get at least some ideas about it.
Well, it allows us to do an esoteric rewrite of the blind man and the elephant. This is fire by friction. No, it's not. It's solar fire. No, it's electric fire.
Oh yeah, and one other thing, in terms of your example of the solar angel, there is a difference between pranic devas and solar devas, in that they are functioning very specifically with the stimulation of mind. Prana is functioning with the stimulation or the maintenance, you could say, of the physical form. And yeah, so you have there are other devas besides just pranic, and so this is the section of prana. So all, references to devas in this section have to do with receiving, distributing prana. And it's this extraordinary network, but there are other devas who do other things, such as the solar angels.
And the chart that you showed before, which shows the hierarchy, and at the bottom it has a little phrase about this chart is just from the angle of the human evolution. A chart revealing the deva would look totally different. You want to see that chart, kind of. It would be really fascinating to look at.
Yeah, exactly. You want to see that chart, and also the one that deals with the animal kingdom, and another chart that deals with the mineral. There are masters involved with the all these kingdoms in nature, and it's we're getting a narrow slice. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Appreciate the conversation. Okay, can we get a reader, please? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to? Yeah, Joe had a question. So
yeah, Joe.
It's not a question as much as a kind of statement of intuition.
Good.
The way I read Dwakol, it's always, he's very, very careful about his punctuation so that he separates different units, like threes. That was my first look. I went through this with a sense of, okay, we've got 3 times 3 maybe. That didn't turn out to be the case. It happens to be 11 semicolons, which suggests to me that we are in some sense talking about a progression from the least amount of fire to the greatest total amount of fire. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, there is that progression. Yeah, and thanks for bringing that out. That's really neat. Yeah, these do, for a while follow threefold, and they tend to reflect conditions of a similar quality. For instance, internal, inherent, and latent really are all latent. It all are descriptions of latent fire. Like when we read about this. I won't go back. But when we read about the about latent fire, right? And then the next stage, radiatory and emanative, are also descriptions of that, what's called usually radiatory fire. It's a further description, right? But then we have different states of fire described here, generated, assimilated, and radiated. Well, it suggests that the generation comes from another, like in the case of the pranic devas, and the assimilation comes from those who receive from those pranic devas, and then in turn radiated, right? Which is back to radiatory and emanative, right? So here he shifts to a threefold process, right? And the same thing here, vivifying, stimulating, and destroying. This is literally, birth, life, and death. So I'll stop there. But you can take a closer look at this. You could spend easily a webinar on this passage alone, right? I find very special passage in Treatise on Cosmic Fire, and it really, in some ways, sums up the essence of the entire treatise.
I have that feeling too. It's like our heart wants to sing. It's a hymn to fire.
It is poetic in that sense. Yeah.
And then I have one question that I wrote, which fits in here as well. And that is, in the Bible, we have the fire descending on the disciples after Christ has ascended. And that was my first question, is when did that happen in this progression that's described in this paragraph?
Yeah, fire as the means of development. The impulse behind the evolutionary process, that would definitely be a stimulative fire. Where does he say stimulating? Yeah, stimulating. And, this one would be good for that because it allows a transition of the form of your form. The transfiguration, that term transfiguration, that literally means a transition of form, right? The form itself is being transfigured. And these stages have to be undergone for that to happen, right? Yeah, because what's being radiated is a stepped down form of the essence, the fire as essence, which is stimulative and thus transforming, right? And in that if it's at the right stage of development, it also is transfiguring.
It's just a remarkable paragraph. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it is. You could, this is a good one for your refrigerator door,
Yes, I agree. Thanks.
All right. So next up, we have the end of this paragraph. Even though there's a change of tone, it continues along the same vein. So could we get a reader for this, please?
Yeah, Nasa, will I read?
Sure. The God of fire and the fire of God interacting upon each other till all fires blend and blaze until all that exists is passed through the fire from a solar system to an ant and emerges as a triple perfection. fire then passes out from the ring pass not as perfected essence, whether essence emerging from the human ring pass not, the planetary ring pass not, or the solar. The wheel of fire turns, and all within that wheel is subjected to the threefold flame, and eventually stands perfected.
Thank you. And that, you'll find his more poetic paragraphs often at the end of a section. And that's where we are here. This is the end of this, the end of the entire chapter, actually. So, first, the God of fire and the fire of God interacting upon each other. Decay describes the fire of God as a sea or pool of fire, which has been cleansed of every vestige of the form aspect. But in truth, the God of fire is a personification of the fire of God. And the fire of God is that God's directed essence. Could we get a reader for this?
Yeah, Robert, would you like to read?
The three aspects of the God of fire and of the fire of God are the three entities of the Logoic Trinity, and each in turn manifests through seven other entities who form their total manifestation. These seven spiritual existences form the dynamic force or will lying back of all manifestation. Ah, there's a clue there.
Yeah, okay.
Will, dynamic force or will.
Yeah, that's certainly the a demonstration of spirit, right? The first ray of will is ever connected with the spirit aspect, and thus with fire in its essence, right? Of course, I've always found that the terms will and power are really misleading. That it has nothing to do with willpower, like human willpower. Man, I'm going to do this. It's not like that. It's an essence that animates our own sense of direction, and that sense of direction is alignment with that potency, and all kingdoms of nature align to it, and then as you step on the path, you've come into the veils between this ultimate will and power begin to fall away. Though I think, final connection with this aspect would be at a very, very high initiation.
Well, you could say also that another way of looking at what you just said is that the will of those members of a certain kingdom is self-will, or it's limited, but the will of the kingdom above, quote unquote, is the divine will, and so that is a totally different nature to self-will.
I wouldn't say it's totally of a different nature. I would say that it is connected through that the lower kingdoms reflect or are stimulated by that higher will. And it looks like in their kingdom, whatever kingdom you're talking about, that's what will looks like at that level, right? And that literally changes subplane by subplane as you move up. A human being who works in the lower mental will is going to be, a quality of, directed, forthright mental understanding, right? And as soon as you bring in that quality of illumination of higher mind, you begin to respond to a whole other aspect of the will,
Well, that's interesting. What you're saying is that the more the will of a specific kingdom evolves, the less it distorts the divine will of the kingdom above. So yeah, I think that's a better way to, to what you said about the point I was making was a little black and white.
Yeah. I think that's closer to it. It's an endless series of veils, then that's in a way, that's the purpose of these webinars is, help get past the next veil in your life, in terms of connecting to the reality of your soul for most of us, Okay. Next, till all fires blend and blaze, until all that exists is passed through the fire from a solar system to an ant and emerges as a triple perfection. So, what is this triple perfection? It could be described in many ways, from the perfected realization of the solar logos through its three major sequential solar systems, to an integration of the three principles by means of the higher initiations, to our passage through an integration of the three life waves that plunge us into the form aspect, then return us to formless realms. But ultimately, it is these three qualities that become one. You see this triangle that encloses them, and it becomes the unity of the three. I like this passage from Letters of Occult Meditation because it relates the idea of the perfection of will, love, and creative activity to the service aspect. Could we get a reader, please?
Tia, you want to read?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
You have the will driving a man on to perfection, the realization of the higher, and resulting in the service of power through love and activity. You have the wisdom or love aspect driving a man on to perfection through the utilization of his oneness with all that breathes, resulting in the service of love through love and activity. You have the activity aspect driving a man on to perfection through the utilization of all in the service of man, first by the utilization of all for himself, then by the graded steps of the utilization of all for the family, of all for those he personally loves, of all for his environing associates, and thus on and up till all is utilized in the service of humanity.
Thank you. Thoughts or questions? All right. Next. Fire then passes out from the ring pass knot as perfected essence, whether essence emerging from the human ring pass knot, the planetary ring pass knot, or the solar. So fire, quote, passing out from the ring pass knot represents transcendence of the limitation of the form represented by that ring pass knot. Fire breaks out of this, in the mineral kingdom, that's radioactivity. In the vegetable kingdom, it's the perfume of that kingdom. So fire breaks out of this limitation by means of the swastika. And could we get a reader for this, please?
Andrea.
Is she muted?
Okay, she may not be there. So, and Veronica?
The svastika, or the fire extending not only from the periphery to the center in four directions, but gradually circulating and radiating from and around the entire periphery. This signifies completed activity in every department of matter until finally we have a blazing, fiery wheel turning every way with radiant channels of fire from the center to the ring past knot. Fire within, without, and around until the wheel is consumed and there is naught remaining but perfected fire.
So this, yeah, so this is a more in-depth exploration of this idea of fire. What does he actually say? Passes out from the ring past knot. This is how it does that. Okay, and then finally, the wheel of fire turns, and all within that wheel is subjected to the threefold flame, and eventually stands perfected. An old commentary from later in TCF beautifully sums up the entire process. Can we get a reader, please?
Janet, would you like to read again?
Sure. The Lord of Life himself sits at the heart and watches. The lords of the solar fire pursue their task and sacrifice themselves to the lunar lords of all the lower planes. They die but resurrect. They pass without and come again. Yet the Lord of Life sits still. The lunar lords begin to die. Their power begins to wane with each successive cycle. The solar lords shine forth in triumph and consign the fourfold ones to fire, the fire which burns and dissipates the form. Many times the work repeats itself. The cycles wax and wane until the day triumphant, when the solar lord acclaims himself and knows himself the ruler. The Lord of Life then turns himself and arises in his might. He consumes the solar lords, and they perish as did the lunar lords. He speaks a word, the fire descends. Blaze forth, gone is the lower fire, with the flame of the solar burning. Gone is the middle fire, with the intensity of the fire from heaven. Naught remaineth, save a threefold flame of violet, indigo, and yellow. It disappears. Then darkness reigns, yet the Lord of Life persists, through invisible, though invisible. So.
Thank you. Yeah, and with that, we finished the last section of the chapter on the nature of prana. The next chapter of the etheric body and prana is called the function of the etheric body, whose sections are here outlined. Could we get a reader, please?
Joe, would you like to read again?
Sure. The function of the etheric body. We will now continue with the discussion of the etheric body and take up the consideration of its function and its relation to the physical body. The two may wisely be considered together, for the interrelation is so close that it is not possible to discuss them separately. Primarily, the functions of the etheric body are three in number. 1, it is the receiver of prana. 2, it is the assimilator of prana. 3, it is the transmitter of prana.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, the bringing together of the etheric and dense physical body was largely successful work of the Lemurian root race. MDR associates rays to these three, he assigns rays to these three pranic functions, assigning ray 3 to pranic reception, ray 2 to assimilation, and ray 1 to pranic transmission, which makes sense. So let's continue. Could we get a reader, please?
Yeah.
So we're now in that section. It is the receiver of prana. Go ahead.
Judy, would you like to read?
The receiver of prana. The etheric body may therefore be described as negative or receptive in respect to the rays of the sun, and as positive and expulsive in respect to the dense physical body. The second function, that of assimilation, is strictly balanced or internal. As stated earlier, the pranic emanations of the sun are absorbed by the etheric body via certain centers which are found principally in the upper part of the body, from whence they are directed downward to the center which is called the etheric spleen, as it is the counterpart in etheric matter of that organ. The main center for the reception of prana at present is the center between the shoulder blades. Another has been allowed to become partially dormant in man through the abuse of so-called civilization, and is situated slightly above the solar plexus.
Thank you. Okay, first, the etheric body may therefore be described as negative or receptive in respect to the rays of the sun, and as positive and expulsive in respect to the dense physical. So we've established the first part of this statement. In order to receive prana from the pranic solar devas, our etheric bodies must be negatively polarized to the rays of the sun, and therefore receptive. But what about the second part? Why are our etheric bodies positive and thus expulsive in relation to our physical bodies? Well, it's just because by being so, our negatively polarized physical spleens are able to receive prana from our positively polarized etheric spleens. As described in this statement on absorption and assimilation, the quote, centers found principally in the upper part of the body, called the pranic triangle, are listed below over here. But there is a fourth pranic center in the head, described in the soul and its mechanism, and he doesn't relate it. Here it is. He doesn't relate it to that pranic triangle here, and this is a bit more technical than what we've been reading, but I thought it was interesting enough to include. So, could we get a reader, please?
Yep. Let's see, back to Karen.
The normal function of the thalamus is to receive sensations from all parts of the body, which are relayed to it through the spinal cord before they reach the chief center. At this is the highest reflex center in the brain, and as all impressions ascend to it, it is called the Udana Prana. The last relay in the cord from which it receives impulses is from that portion of the cord called the bulk, which is on a level with the root of the nose. Udana Prana is therefore said to rule the portion of the head above this point. The yogi, by a conscious control over the Udana Prana, suppresses all incoming and outgoing sensations into it, and this is necessary to prevent the distraction of the mind which he is anxious to control.
So this is fascinating. He doesn't say how this fits in with the pranic triangle, just what the quality of this Udana Prana is. Is it even, etheric, or is it, does it come from the etheric levels of the mental plane? He doesn't indicate that here, but I thought it was interesting to consider. Okay, next. The main center for the reception of prana is at present a center between the shoulder blades. Another has been allowed to become partially dormant in man through the abuses of so-called civilization and is situated slightly above the solar plexus. I love these kind of statements because it makes you, then what would be a better form of civilization that would, foster the reception of prana? Many questions are raised. Okay, since DK also places the heart center between the shoulder blades, it'd be interesting to know how these two centers interrelate, because they're obviously quite close together, right? We might ask how civilization has stunted the pranic center, situated slightly above the solar plexus. In other of his writings, DK laments the alarming lowering of vitality in modern humanity as compared to earlier races, and that this seems to suggest a similar idea. I saw Tom's hand go up. Tom?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering that you mentioned the role of the head in the reception of the prana. Is it said somewhere explicitly that the head has a role in receiving the prana? Or could you just say that perhaps the role of the head is a transmitter of prana? Or because I didn't find in this book,
no,
the way I read anything about the head as a receiver.
No, I'm with you on that. I can't really answer your question. Here's the triangle, which we're going to be coming to next, right? And he describes it here. Between the shoulder blades, above the diaphragm, and the spleen. That's this triangle. And if he gets more into discussion about that, but then in another book, you have this, and he doesn't talk about reception, absorption, or dissemination here. In fact, he only calls it udana prana, suggesting a combination of mind. Of course, here he says it said reception. Of course, again, always have to be clear. This illustration is not from DK. This is just an illustration that happened to show these various areas. And, when it's not DK material, you just have to be aware. It may or may not be true, But still, it's, you see this sense of circulation going on here. For instance, the udana, mind, and this upward flow. See the greenish blue here? So you have this quality in this upward flow, and then you have this pranic color all throughout the head. So I had to include it, basically just to confuse everybody. Sorry about that. But, I didn't do a deeper research to see if there was anything that would connect it. I tend to think it's not part of, it doesn't directly relate to this, what's called a pranic triangle. It could have something to do with what we do with the prana once it's in our body, which the writer A.E. Powell, and we'll be looking at his stuff, talks more about, because, as complex as it may sometimes seem what DK's giving, he just hits the high points. He just is giving us an outline. He's hinting at a much deeper science, and this may be going one step further into that science.
Yeah, and that's why it's interesting, because later in the book he uses these etheric triangles very specifically, the way man evolves, how the different centers always in triangle form, evolve higher and higher up, but he doesn't say anything about the head, so that's a mystery, Stan.
Yeah.
we have to get enlightened so we know.
Yeah, that's right. Come back. As soon as you do, come back.
I will.
And
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So I read that.
Couple of statements.
Yeah.
And a question. So Joe, thanks for the Udana Prana quote. As long as we are in bodies in service, perhaps the yogi needs to be able to relate above and below.
Yeah. There is a whole field of yoga connected with this prana yoga, that where they learn how to manipulate this vitality, right? Yeah.
And then Jerry, in relation to the circulation of Udana, the Master DK says that one of the results of meditation is the increase of prana in the etheric body.
Yeah. And then one wonders if through that increase, one then brings this circulation, this higher form of the circulation, into activity. Obviously these lower functions are working, already, and prana is going to be stimulative of those processes, but that through meditation, it would seem that this link, this udana prana, would become more vivified. But it's speculation. Anyone else? I saw Robert's hand.
And then, yeah, Robert.
Yo, dude.
Soul and Its Mechanism was written by Alice. So I wondered if this quote was something where she was quoting the Tibetan, or is this something that she wrote by herself?
I couldn't tell you.
Because that could be, some of the stuff that she writes tends to be more exoteric than.
Yeah, I wouldn't. She's not a master of wisdom. She's what I would call a mere human being. But my guess is that she condensed some and rewrote some sacred source from the East, because this smacks of Eastern Buddhic Hindu teachings, right? And that she internalized it and rewrote it according to her understanding. That would be my guess.
Yeah, well, I think Light of the Soul, for example, has a lot about the different kinds of prana, and those are taken from the Eastern teachings. So, and some of the Eastern teachings are exoteric, and some of them are esoteric, and so DK is very, very precise in a way that is unique to him, I think.
Yeah, the one thing and one of the reasons we're all here is because we can really trust DK's statements, as representing that relative level of truth in relation to our ability to understand. Any other source you have to evaluate, so yeah, thanks, Robert. Okay, could we get a reader for this? This takes us down into that triangle that we were just showing.
Kirsten, you'd like to read?
Yes. In the coming root race, and increasingly in this, the necessity for the exposure of these two centers to the rays of the sun will be appreciated, with a corresponding improvement in physical vitality and adaptability. The three centers, one between the shoulder blades, two above the diaphragm, and three and the spleen, make, if one could see it, a radiant etheric triangle, which triangle is the originating impulse for the later pranic circulation throughout the entire system.
Yeah, so right away, he's hinting that he can see it, right? If one could but see it, well, obviously he can. I mean, as a master of wisdom, certainly you have etheric vision, and so he is able to see this radiant etheric triangle. So first, in the coming root race, and increasingly in this, the necessity for the exposure of these two centers to the rays of the sun will be appreciated with a corresponding improvement in physical vitality and adaptability. Well, if this is all it takes, we need to all spend more time outside and shirtless, right? But I have to wonder if there has also been an atrophying of one or more of these centers described here as a radiant etheric triangle. Could we get a reader for Michael's comments on this?
Yeah. Miri.
Yes, we note that pranic circulation begins with this radiant etheric triangle, the pranic triangle before reaching the entire system. Probably each type of atom, solar, planetary, human, and the atom of matter, has a correspondence to this pranic triangle. As the center between the shoulder blades is near the lungs, the relationship between breathing and vitality can be graphically seen.
Thank you. Yeah, so, pranayama, which is the yoga of breath, you could say, certainly is a big part of that discipline is about learning to bring in prana to vitalize the form. Okay, we're still a few minutes. Next up, could we get a reader, please?
Yeah, Andrea.
The etheric body is really a network of fine channels, which are the component parts of one interlacing fine cord. One portion of this cord being the magnetic link that unites the physical and astral bodies and which is snapped or broken after the withdrawal of the etheric body from the dense physical body at the time of death. The silver cord is loosened, as the Bible expresses it, and this is the basis of the legend of the faithful sister who cuts the thread of life with the dreaded shears.
Thank you. Okay, first, the etheric body is really a network of fine channels, which are the component parts of one interlacing fine cord. The statement stresses the fact that there are no dead-end branches or broken links in the etheric body. It is continuous and of forming one total cord. And I see, in my mind's eye, I see a series of strands, or as he calls them, a network of channels that form this unbroken cord. We tend to think of the twofold sutratma as separate from the etheric body, but it's not, as this statement makes clear. We might visualize the strands of the quote unquote etheric cord conforming to the blueprint of the physical body as recorded in the physical permanent atom without losing their integrity as a cord. Next. One portion of this cord being the magnetic link, which unites the physical and the astral bodies, and which is snapped or broken after the withdrawal of the etheric body from the dense physical body at the time of death. Okay, the snapping of the cord is a familiar concept to students of occultism, but there's also another portion of the etheric cord, the consciousness aspect of the sutratma, which is anchored in the brain and is eventually used to consciously connect with the soul, as described in The Light of the Soul. So could we get a reader here, please?
Yes. Nasa.
The light of the soul pours forth, and the man on the physical plane in his brain consciousness is thereby enabled to perceive that which before was dark and hidden from him. The process may technically be described in the following concise terms. A, meditation. B, polarization in the soul or egoic consciousness. C, contemplation, or the turning of the soul light upon that which is to be known or investigated. D, the subsequent pouring down of the knowledge ascertained in a stream of illumination into the brain via the sutratma, the thread soul, silver cord, or magnetic link. This thread passes through the mind and illumines it. The thoughts engendered in the automatic response of the chitta or mind stuff to the knowledge conveyed are then impressed upon the brain, and the man in his physical consciousness becomes cognizant of what the soul knows. He becomes illumined.
Thank you. Finally, the silver cord is loosed, as the Bible expresses it, and this is the basis of the legend of the faithful sister who cuts the thread of life with the dreaded shears. MDR tells us, quote, the faithful sister is related to Pluto, who cuts the thread. Not only this thread, but other threads of a higher nature that bind together soul and personality. Here's the verse from Ecclesiastes that DK was talking about, which describes the breaking of the thread. Remember him before the silver cord is broken and the golden bowl is crushed. This pitcher by the well is shattered, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. But the sister who cuts the thread of life is found in the Greek myth of the three fates, also called the three morae, whose names were Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. It was the latter who was responsible for cutting the thread of life. And I think we'll stop there. We'll pick up here next time.